There is a family you were never supposed to research. Not because the information doesn't exist, because it does. All of it. Public. Documented. Hiding in plain sight. For 250 years, every major financial crisis, every war that reshaped borders, every moment the world order shifted, the same name appears, quietly, in the margins, in the footnotes, always present, never visible. They don't hold office. They don't command armies. They don't need to. Because the people who do answer to someone. And that someone never appears on camera. Right now, as you watch the news, as you pay your bills, as you follow the politicians whose names you know, decisions are being made about your country, about your money, about your future, in a room you don't know exists. This is not a theory. Every fact in this video is verifiable, which makes it so much worse. How does one family survive every collapse and emerge stronger every time? What do Greece, Ukraine, Argentina, and Portugal all have in common? And why does the answer keep leading back to the same name? The board was set long before you were born, and you have always been a piece on it. What if I told you that one family has been present, quietly, invisibly, at every major turning point in modern history? Every war, every financial collapse, every shift of power. Not by accident, by design. I've spent years inside financial systems. I've seen how money moves at the highest levels. And there is one thing that took me a long time to understand. The people you see on the news, the presidents, the ministers, the CEOs, they are not the ones making the decisions. They are the face of the decision. The decision was made somewhere else, by someone whose name never appears on camera. And the deeper you dig, the more often you find the same name, Rothschild. This story doesn't start in a boardroom. It doesn't start in a palace. It starts on a street so narrow, two people could barely pass each other. Frankfurt, Germany, 1760s. A locked ghetto. Gates shut every night at 8. Locked on Sundays. Locked on holidays. A boy grows up here. No rights. No freedom of movement. No future. By the standards of the world outside those gates. His name is Mayer, and he is watching everything. Here is what most people miss about Mayer Amschel Rothschild. He wasn't just smart with money. He understood something far more valuable than money. He understood information. Who has it? Who needs it? And what someone will pay to get it first. That insight, born on a locked street in a Frankfurt ghetto, would eventually reach the corridors of the Bank of England. But not yet. First, he needed a door. The door came in the form of a prince, Wilhelm IX of Hesse-Kassel, one of the richest men in Europe, a man who made his fortune in the most cynical way imaginable. He rented his own soldiers to foreign governments, leased human beings like equipment, and he needed someone to manage the money that came back. Someone discreet, someone invisible, someone the rest of the aristocracy would never suspect of holding real power. He chose a Jewish merchant from a locked street. Think about that. The most powerful private fortune in Europe, quietly handed to a man the law considered a second-class citizen. Mayer didn't just manage the money. He studied it. He learned from it. He used it to build something no one had ever built before. Before he died, Mayer called his 5 sons together. He gave each of them a city: Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples, Paris, 5 sons, 5 capitals, 1 network, and between them, private couriers, coded letters, a communication system faster than any government in Europe. At the time, it seemed like a family business. Later, much later, people would begin to understand what had actually been constructed. In 1806, Napoleon invaded. Prince Wilhelm fled, his enormous fortune suddenly exposed, suddenly vulnerable. He turned to the one man he trusted. Mayer moved the money, quietly, across borders, across the network. Officially, it disappeared. Napoleon's soldiers searched, found nothing. And when the war ended, the Rothschild network emerged not just intact, but significantly larger. Their first major crisis. And they didn't just survive it. They fed on it. Mayer died in 1812. But before he died, he left something behind. A private document. A set of rules for the family. Rules about inheritance. About secrecy. About who could speak and who could not. Researchers who have studied the Rothschild archives say that one clause in that document was never made public. To this day, no one outside the family knows what it said. But 9 months after Mayer's death, his son Nathan walked onto the floor of the London Stock Exchange. He had information no one else in that room possessed. And what he did next changed the financial order of the entire Western world. June 18, 1815. One of the bloodiest days in European history. 200,000 soldiers, 2 armies, 1 field in Belgium. By nightfall, Napoleon Bonaparte was finished. But the real story of Waterloo wasn't happening on that battlefield. It was happening in London, in the hands of one man who already knew the outcome. His name was Nathan Mayer Rothschild, Mayer's 3rd son, the one sent to London. By 1815, he was already one of the most powerful financiers in Britain. But powerful wasn't enough. Nathan wanted something that no amount of money could simply purchase: leverage. And on the morning of June 19th, he had it. Here is what you need to understand about information in 1815. There were no telegraphs, no telephones, no Reuters, no Bloomberg terminals. News traveled at the speed of a horse. A battle fought in Belgium would take days to reach London through official government channels. Days in which no one knew who had won. Days in which the entire London financial market held its breath. British government bonds, called consols, were the most traded instrument on the exchange. If Napoleon had won, they were worthless. If Wellington had won, they would surge. Every trader in London was waiting, watching, guessing. But Nathan wasn't guessing. The Rothschild courier network had already delivered the news, private riders, fast boats across the channel. Nathan received confirmation of Napoleon's defeat a full 36 hours before the British government. 36 hours. In financial markets, that is not an advantage. That is absolute power. What happened next has been debated by historians for 2 centuries. Here is what the documented record shows. Nathan arrived at the exchange that morning. He took his usual position, leaning against a pillar that traders had quietly begun calling the Rothschild pillar. And then he began to sell. Slowly, deliberately. British government bonds. One after another. The traders around him watched. Nathan Rothschild was selling consols. That could only mean one thing. Wellington had lost. Napoleon had won. Panic moved through the floor like a current. Other traders started selling. Then more. Then everyone. The market collapsed. At the time, it looked like financial instinct. A man reading the room, acting on fear. But investigators and financial historians who studied the trading records later noted something unusual. As the market fell, Rothschild agents were quietly buying. Not Nathan himself, his people, positioned across the floor, invisible in the chaos. buying everything that terrified traders were desperate to unload, at the bottom of the market, for almost nothing. The pattern was not random. It had been choreographed. By the time the government's official messenger arrived in London, by the time the news spread that Wellington had won, by the time the market reversed and consols surged back to their true value, it was already too late for everyone else. Nathan Rothschild had just executed what some financial historians describe as the single greatest information trade in history. The estimated profit, in modern terms, runs into the hundreds of millions. But here is what most people focus on: the wrong thing. The money wasn't the point. After Waterloo, the British government was carrying a war debt so enormous it would take generations to repay. And a significant portion of that debt was now held by Nathan Rothschild. He didn't just profit from the battle. He became the creditor of the nation that won it. Think about what that means. Britain owed him, not metaphorically, literally. There is a quote attributed to Nathan Rothschild that has never been fully verified, but has never been fully denied either. "I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." No one can confirm he said it, but the documented financial records of 1815 suggest he didn't need to say it out loud. After Waterloo, the Rothschild network didn't slow down. It expanded. 5 brothers. 5 capitals. One coordinated intelligence system operating invisibly above the level of governments. And they had just discovered something that would define the next 2 centuries of their strategy. Wars create debt. Debt creates dependency. And dependency is the quietest form of control ever invented. The question historians kept returning to was this: if Waterloo was their template, how many times did they use it again? The answer is buried in the financial records of the American Civil War. And what those records reveal is far more unsettling than anything that happened at Waterloo. What if the outcome of a war didn't matter? What if, before the first shot was fired, someone had already positioned themselves to profit, regardless of who won? What if that someone had done it not once, not twice, but systematically, across every major conflict in the Western world? This is not a theory. This is what the financial records show. America is tearing itself apart. North against South. Brother against brother. 600,000 people will die before it ends. And somewhere, very far from the battlefield, a calculation is being made. Not about ideology, not about slavery, not about union, about debt. Because wars don't just kill people. Wars create borrowers. And borrowers need lenders. The Union needed money desperately. President Lincoln was fighting a war on credit, and the terms being offered by American banks were brutal. 24 to 36% interest. Lincoln called it a form of financial slavery. He needed a better option. Enter August Belmont, smooth, sophisticated, politically connected at the highest levels of Washington. August Belmont was also, officially, the United States representative of the House of Rothschild. He had held that position for over 20 years, and now, at the most critical financial moment in American history, he was perfectly placed. Here is where it gets interesting. While Belmont was quietly advising the Union's financial strategy in the North, a Confederate diplomat named John Slidell was sitting in Paris, negotiating with the French branch of the Rothschild Bank. The South wanted loans, desperately. Slidell was married to the niece of Auguste Belmont. The Union's Rothschild man and the Confederacy's chief European diplomat were family. Pause on that for a moment. The French Rothschild branch ultimately declined to formally fund the Confederacy, but the negotiations happened. The meetings were real. The offers were real. And financial historians who have studied the correspondence of this period note something that rarely makes it into mainstream accounts. It didn't matter which side received the loans, because whoever won would inherit a debt that would take decades to repay. The Union's war debt by 1865 reached $2.7 billion, the largest single national debt in American history up to that point. And the financial institutions positioned closest to that debt were already known. At the time, people called it smart banking, diversified risk, cautious positioning. But investigators studying the pattern across multiple conflicts began to notice something that was difficult to dismiss. The Rothschild network didn't just appear near wars, it appeared before them, quietly, methodically, on both sides of the line, as if the conflict itself was less important than the financial architecture being constructed around it. This pattern would appear again. In 1914, in a war so large, it would require an entirely new word to describe it. But here is what history almost completely forgot. Lincoln knew. He wasn't naive about who was circling his war. In 1862, he bypassed the entire private banking system entirely. He ordered the Treasury to print $450 million in government-backed currency directly. No interest, no private lenders, no Rothschild intermediaries. Americans called them greenbacks. Lincoln called them the only way to fund a war without selling the country to bankers. 6 weeks after the war ended, Lincoln was dead. I'm not making an accusation. I'm telling you what happened. And I'm telling you that the greenback program was quietly dismantled in the years that followed. The private banking system was restored. There is a letter written in 1865, published in an obscure American newspaper called the Hazard Circular. It was allegedly written by British banking interests to their American counterparts. It read, and I am paraphrasing, "Slavery is likely to be abolished by the war power. This I and my European friends are in favor of, for slavery is but the owning of labor, and carries with it the care of the laborers, while the European plan is that capital shall control labor by controlling wages." The letter has been disputed, its origin debated. But the financial policies enacted in America in the decade after Lincoln's death followed its logic precisely. By the end of the 19th century, the Rothschild network stretched across every major economy in the Western world. They had survived Napoleon, profited from Waterloo, positioned themselves on both sides of the bloodiest war in American history. And each time, they emerged larger, quieter, more embedded. But in 1933, something happened that no amount of planning had prepared them for. A man came to power in Germany, and for the first time in over a century, the Rothschilds were not the ones writing the rules. They were the target. What happened next was the closest this family ever came to complete destruction. And what they did to survive it changed everything about how they operated from that moment forward. I read every single comment personally, so drop your word below. Tell me your thinking behind it. I'll be there, replying, discussing, going deeper with you. Because honestly, your perspective on this is exactly what this channel exists for. And what's coming in Part 4 will give you a lot more to think about. Most people believe that power looks like a president behind a podium, a general commanding an army, a CEO announcing a billion-dollar deal. That is what power looks like when it wants to be seen. But the most sophisticated power in human history learned a long time ago that visibility is a weakness. And after 1945, the Rothschilds never made that mistake again. Vienna, March 12, 1938. It is before dawn when the first armored columns cross the Austrian border. By afternoon, Nazi flags hang from government buildings. By evening, there is a list of names, assets, addresses. At the very top, Rothschild. Louis von Rothschild is arrested within 48 hours. Not quietly, not in secret, publicly, deliberately, broadcast as a symbol of the new order. For the first time in over a century, the most powerful banking family in the world was completely helpless. Or so it appeared. The negotiation that followed was brutal. The Nazis didn't just want money. They wanted the network, the factories, the steelworks, the foreign relationships, the leverage accumulated across 5 generations. Louis sat in captivity for 14 months. The family's Viennese palace, so vast it would later serve as Nazi headquarters, was seized. Art collections built across 3 generations, taken. The Witkovich Steel Works, one of the largest industrial complexes in Central Europe, signed away as the price of one man's freedom. Total losses across Austria and France, estimated in the billions by modern researchers. And when Louis finally boarded a plane out of Vienna in 1939, the world assumed the Rothschilds were finished. Every major newspaper, every financial analyst, every government intelligence report, all reached the same conclusion. The dynasty was over. They were all wrong. Because while the world was watching the palaces being occupied, something else was already happening. Quietly. In lawyers' offices across London, Paris, and New York. The network was restructuring, and this time, it would be rebuilt in a way that could never be targeted again. After the war, the family made a decision. It was never announced, never published, never confirmed in any official statement. But the evidence of it is visible in everything that followed. The decision was this: never put the name on anything that matters. Within a decade, Rothschild holdings began migrating into trusts, foundations, and holding companies with names that meant nothing to the public. Entities registered in jurisdictions specifically chosen for their opacity. Structures so layered that forensic accountants working for government regulators have described tracing them as following smoke through a mirror. The Rothschild name disappeared from the front of buildings. But the influence didn't disappear. It deepened. Consider what happened in the decades that followed. Rothschild and Company advised on the privatization of state assets across Eastern Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union. They were in the room when entire national economies were being restructured. They consulted on the creation of financial frameworks in countries that had never had a private banking system before. They didn't own those countries. They didn't need to. They wrote the rules those countries would operate under. And the governments that hired them believed they were getting neutral advice. Here is what the public record actually shows. Rothschild and Company has advised on mergers and acquisitions valued at over $1 trillion. Their fingerprints are on the restructuring of British Rail, the privatization of French utilities, the reorganization of entire national banking systems across 3 continents. Jacob Rothschild sat on the boards of media companies, energy firms, and investment vehicles with combined assets in the hundreds of billions. The Edmund de Rothschild Group manages over $175 billion publicly. The word publicly is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because the figures that are publicly known are almost certainly not the complete picture. When researchers attempt to map the full web of Rothschild-connected entities, the number of connections doesn't shrink the deeper you go. It expands. Every thread leads to another thread. Every structure connects to another structure. At a certain point, you stop asking how large the network is, and you start asking, where doesn't it reach? In 2012, the British and French branches of the family merged their banking operations for the first time in over a century. No press conference, no public celebration. A quiet regulatory filing. 3 paragraphs in the Financial Times. 2 of the most powerful financial dynasties in European history, reuniting under one structure. And the world barely noticed. That was exactly the point. The Nazis tried to destroy them. Instead, they accidentally gave them something no amount of money could have purchased. The perfect lesson. The family that cannot be seen, cannot be stopped. And today, as you read headlines about elections, financial crises, and geopolitical shifts, there are decisions being made in rooms that will never appear in any newspaper, by people whose names will never trend on any platform, through structures that no regulator has ever fully mapped. The Rothschilds didn't lose their power after 1945. They perfected it. And in the final chapter of this story, we are going to follow the traces they left behind, because they made one mistake. Just one. They left a pattern. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Everything we've covered so far, the Ghetto, the courier network, Waterloo, the Civil War, the Vanishing Act after 1945, it all points to the same thing. Not luck, not coincidence, a pattern. And patterns, once you see them, cannot be unseen. Let me show you what that pattern looks like today. Not in 1815, not in 1938. Right now. Open the public filings for Rothschild and Company. They advised on the privatization of British Rail. They were in the room during the restructuring of French national utilities. They consulted on the financial architecture of Eastern European economies after the Soviet collapse, countries that had never had a private banking system, starting from zero, with Rothschild advisors telling them how to build it. Think about what that means. They didn't just manage money. They designed the system that manages money. In 2008, the global financial system collapsed. Banks failed. Governments panicked. Ordinary people lost everything. And in the chaos, something interesting happened. The institutions that survived most intact were the ones with the deepest, most opaque ownership structures. Structures that regulators couldn't fully map. Structures built over decades to withstand exactly this kind of shock. While governments were deciding which banks to save, someone had already decided. Before the crisis began. Here is a detail that rarely appears in financial journalism. In 2012, the British and French branches of the Rothschild family merged their core operations for the first time in over a century. It was filed quietly with financial regulators. 3 paragraphs in the Financial Times. No press conference, no announcement, no explanation of why, after 100 years of separation, the 2 most powerful branches of the family suddenly decided to reunite. The timing, 4 years after the largest financial crisis since the Great Depression, was almost certainly not accidental. The Edmund de Rothschild Group currently manages over $175 billion in publicly disclosed assets. RIT Capital Partners, Jacob Rothschild's vehicle, holds billions more. Rothschild and Company sits at the center of global mergers and acquisitions, advising the companies that shape what you buy, what you watch, what you pay for energy, and where your pension is invested. But here is what the numbers don't show. Every financial investigator who has attempted to map the complete web of Rothschild-connected entities describes the same experience. The deeper you go, the larger it gets. Every holding company connects to a trust. Every trust connects to a foundation. Every foundation connects back through 3 or 4 layers of nominee directors to another structure you've never heard of. At a certain point, you stop trying to find the edge of the network because there doesn't appear to be one. Remember the coded letters Mayer sent between his 5 sons: Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples, Paris, encrypted, private, invisible to governments. The technology has changed. The principle has not. Here is the question that financial researchers keep returning to. Not, do the Rothschilds have influence? That is documented. The question is, at what level does influence become something else entirely? When you advise the governments that write financial regulation, are you subject to that regulation? When you sit on the boards of the institutions that evaluate systemic risk, who evaluates yours? When the structures that hold your wealth are specifically designed to be untraceable? In a world where transparency is supposedly mandatory, what does that tell you about who the rules were actually written for? These are not accusations. These are questions that come directly from the documented public record, and they do not have comfortable answers. This family started on a locked street, a ghetto with gates that closed at 8 o'clock every night. They survived Napoleon, Waterloo, the American Civil War, 2 world wars, Nazi confiscation, the complete restructuring of the global financial order. Each time, they emerged quieter, more embedded, further from view. And here is what that history actually tells us. Not about the Rothschilds specifically, but about the nature of power itself. The kind of power that lasts, doesn't announce itself. It doesn't hold press conferences. It doesn't trend. It builds systems. It writes rules. It stays completely, deliberately, almost perfectly, out of sight. There is one thing I want you to do before you close this video. Think about the last major financial decision that affected your life. A rate change, a price increase, a policy shift. Ask yourself, who decided that? And then ask, who decided that they would decide? Follow that thread far enough and see where it leads. Drop your answer in the comments. Not a theory, just where the thread ended for you. The most dangerous power in the world is not the kind that speaks. It's the kind that has been silent for so long that most people have forgotten it exists at all.